On the day of my mother's funeral, my mother-in-law scoffed, "You're just like her, weak, broke, and pitiful." My husband didn't say a word. I smiled politely, but inside I was screaming. Later that evening, her secret slipped loud enough for the whole family to hear. My name is Annika, I'm 42, and I've been married to Wallace for nearly 2 decades. We live, or rather, lived in Tacoma, Washington. I used to think we had a stable, if somewhat distant, relationship. We weren't romantic much anymore, but we coexisted. Quiet mornings, the same dinner routine, polite check-ins. It wasn't love like in the movies, but it felt like a kind of safety. That illusion came crashing down the day my mother died. It was a cold February morning, the kind that clings to your skin and gets inside your bones. My mother, Francesca, had been battling Parkinson's for nearly 6 years. In the end, it wasn't the disease itself, but a sudden case of pneumonia that took her. I'd been caring for her full-time for the last 8 months. I'd taken a leave of absence from work. Financially, things got tighter. Emotionally, I unraveled in private, a little more each week. Wallace didn't exactly support the decision. He tolerated it. Said things like, "Just don't let it become your whole life." But she was my whole life in those months. She needed me, and I refused to let her die alone or scared. She passed on a Wednesday morning. Peaceful, quiet. I held her hand until the very end. The funeral was simple, modest, held at a small chapel just off 6th Avenue. I managed to speak a few words about her strength, her solitude, and how even though she wasn't affectionate, she had taught me resilience. My voice cracked only once. That was my private victory of the day. Afterward, we had people back at our house for a small gathering. Friends, coworkers, a few distant relatives, and of course, Wallace's family. Most of them came out of obligation. But Sybil, Wallace's mother, seemed to attend for the sheer opportunity to be seen grieving, even though she hadn't spoken to my mother in over 2 years. The moment that broke me happened about an hour in. I was in the hallway, trying to collect empty cups and plates, when I crossed paths with Sybil. She blocked the hallway, wine glass in hand, and looked me over like I was something she'd stepped in. Then she leaned in and said it, just loud enough for my husband to hear behind her. "You're just like her, weak, broken, and pitiful." Just like that, at my mother's funeral, in my own home, I stared at her. I didn't say a word. I glanced at Wallace, standing just a few feet behind her. He looked down, pretending to be preoccupied with his phone. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't say a goddamn thing. I smiled, tight-lipped, the kind of smile you give to keep yourself from collapsing, and I walked away. Inside, I was screaming. Later that evening, most people had left. A few relatives and neighbors lingered, chatting in the living room. I was in the kitchen, finally alone for a breath, when I overheard Sybil again. Her voice carried easily through the old house. She was talking to Wallace's cousin Meredith, who had clearly asked about Wallace's past. I only caught the tail end, but it was enough. She lost the baby, yes, but not before Wallace's father paid her off. It was for the best. We couldn't let some little tramp ruin his future. I froze. At first, I wasn't sure I'd heard her right. I backed up quietly to the edge of the doorway. Meredith didn't respond, just shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Sybil continued, almost gleefully. She was older than him, too. Ridiculous little fling. I told Wallace she was a leech, but he wouldn't listen. Took his father to step in to fix it. I stood there in the dark kitchen, my heart in my throat. Wallace had never told me any of this. We met when we were 25. He'd never mentioned a girl before me, certainly never a pregnancy. In fact, one of the things that made me feel connected to him was how he seemed to understand my grief over losing our pregnancies. I assumed he shared the same hole in his heart that I did. That night, after everyone left, I confronted him. I was still in my funeral dress. He was sitting on the couch, watching the local news like it was any other day. I asked him plainly, "Who was Macy?" His face changed. He didn't speak right away. Then finally, he admitted it. "We were in college. I was 19. It was a mistake. My dad handled it." That was all he said at first, so I pushed. "Did you love her? Did she keep the baby?" He looked ashamed. "I don't know. I never saw her again. My father gave her money. She left." I felt sick. "You let me believe our pregnancies were your first losses," I said. "You let me think we were in this pain together." He didn't answer. Just sat there with the same blank expression he wore earlier when his mother insulted me in front of him. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just picked up my purse and left. I spent the night in my car, parked near Ruston Way, just staring at the water. I thought about my mother and how hard she fought to stay independent, how even when she was dying, she never once let anyone belittle her, and how I had been doing exactly the opposite for years. Wallace's silence wasn't new. It was just that now I couldn't ignore it anymore. I'd spent years mistaking his passivity for peace, but it wasn't peaceful. It was complicated. Over the next week, I kept my distance. I stayed with my best friend Patris in Seattle. She gave me her spare room and her honesty. She'd never liked Wallace, and now I understood why. Then came the envelope. It was delivered to our house, but Wallace forwarded it to me without opening it. Inside was a photocopy of a birth certificate. The father's name, Wallace Ray Donovan. The mother's name, Macy Lillian Heron. The child was 22 now. A girl, there was a second document, simple but heavy. A legal request for contact. She wanted to meet her father. I haven't told Wallace about it yet. At least not directly. But I did tell Sybil. I'll continue this soon, because what happened next changed everything, and it happened in front of the entire family. I didn't rush into the confrontation. That was never my style. Instead, I waited. I let the information simmer like a pot just shy of boiling over. I carried it in my chest every day for the next week. The knowledge that there was a young woman out there whose very existence had been erased by the people I'd called family for nearly 20 years. That Wallace had been part of it, whether by force or apathy, and that his mother had spoken about it like it was nothing more than a minor inconvenience, a speed bump in her son's promising life. I stayed at Patris's. I couldn't bear to sleep in the same bed as Wallace. Not after everything. Not after he sat there, watching the news, acting like my mother's funeral, and his mother's venom hadn't cracked something wide open between us. Wallace didn't reach out at first. That honestly hurt more than anything. There was no, come home, no, let's talk, just a few emotionless texts. Let me know when you're ready. Hope you're okay. I can explain more if you want. He could explain. Right, like he hadn't had 2 decades to come clean. I sat on Patris's small balcony most nights, glass of wine in hand, thinking. Replaying every moment in our marriage when I'd thought I was being supported, only to realize I'd been quietly tolerated. Wallace never told me how to live, but he also never stood up for me, never protected me. He let his mother chip away at my confidence for years. And the worst part, I let him. But this time, I wasn't going to protect their reputation anymore. I wasn't going to stay quiet. The following Sunday, Wallace called and asked if I was planning to come to his cousin Meredith's birthday dinner. It was going to be small, just family. Sybil would be there, of course. I told him I'd think about it. And then I called Macy. I'd spent 2 days going back and forth, debating whether it was even my place. But she'd included her number in the letter. So I called. It rang once, twice. And then a young woman's voice, cautious but clear, said hello. We talked for nearly an hour. She wasn't angry. She was curious. She didn't want money. She didn't want to ruin anyone's life. She just wanted to know where she came from. She'd found the old paperwork her mother had kept, documents with Wallace's name, the payoff agreement, and a letter from Wallace's father's attorney warning Macy's mother to stay away. Her voice was steady as she told me that part, but I could hear the crack beneath it. She didn't ask me to do anything, just thanked me for reaching out, said she never expected to hear from anyone on that side of the family. That conversation solidified everything for me. I was done pretending, so I told Wallace I'd come to the dinner. Meredith's house was cozy, all soft lamps and mismatched furniture that smelled like vanilla candles. Everyone was in a good mood. Laughing, catching up, sharing stories about the last time they'd all been together, which, in typical fashion, ignored any mention of funerals, estrangement, or real emotion. Sybil was holding court in the dining room, wearing a pearl necklace that looked like it had been passed down through generations of women who'd learned to weaponize charm. She greeted me with a cool kiss on the cheek and a thin smile. You look better, she said, not unkindly, but with a tone that implied I'd spent the past week in a fetal position. I thanked her and went to sit beside Patris, who'd come as my +1 for moral support. Really, she came because she didn't trust me not to implode without a witness. Dinner was nice, normal, bizarrely so. People passed bread, made small talk, complimented the roast. I kept my voice even, my smile polite. I watched Wallace across the table. He seemed relaxed. Almost like he thought I'd moved on. And then, as everyone started in on dessert, I stood up. "I want to make a toast," I said, lifting my glass of sparkling water. I didn't trust myself with wine. The room went quiet. All eyes turned to me. Wallace looked confused. Sybil paused mid-sip. I took a breath. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I began, voice calm. "About family, about honesty, and about how secrets have a way of bleeding through the cracks no matter how tightly we try to bury them." Wallace shifted in his chair. "Some of you may know," I continued, "that when Wallace was in college, he got someone pregnant." A beat. The sound of forks clinking against plates. Someone coughed. Sybil set her glass down with an audible clink. "She wasn't part of the plan," I said. "So the family paid for her to go away. Wallace never saw her again. He never told me about her, not when we got married, not when we were trying to have children of our own, not when I lost 3 pregnancies." Silence. "He told me he understood my pain," I added. "But the truth is he's lived this before and chose to forget it." I glanced at Wallace. His face had gone pale. "I learned about it at my mother's funeral," I said, looking directly at Sybil now. "Because someone couldn't help but gossip when the room got quiet." Sybil opened her mouth, but I lifted a hand. "Don't," I said. "Don't make this about your intentions or what you thought was best. This isn't about you." Then I turned to the rest of the table. "There's a young woman out there," I said. "She's 22, her name is Ivy, she wants to meet her father, she has a right to. And whether Wallace decides to do that or not, I'm going to, because unlike some people in this room, I believe she matters." No one spoke. Wallace looked stunned. Sybil looked like she'd swallowed a mouthful of ash. And me, I felt steady. More steady than I had in years. I sat down, picked up my fork, took a bite of peach cobbler like nothing had happened. The room stayed quiet for a long time. Meredith was the first to speak. A simple wow under her breath. "I didn't care what they thought. I didn't do it for them. I did it for me. And for Ivy." The silence at the table stretched until it snapped into hushed murmurs and the soft scrape of cutlery pushed aside. Wallace didn't say a word. He stared at his plate, his shoulders stiff like someone preparing for a verdict they already knew was coming. Sybil, on the other hand, attempted a rescue. She straightened in her chair and forced a laugh that didn't touch her eyes. "Well," she began, "I don't know what this young woman told you, but we did what any parents would have done to protect their son from a mistake." I looked at her, really looked at her. I had spent so many years avoiding direct conflict with Sybil. I danced around her insults, played nice, smiled through gritted teeth, but not anymore. "No, Sybil," I said calmly. "You didn't protect him, you taught him to run. And he's been running ever since." Wallace flinched. And that was all I needed. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply excused myself from the table and walked out of the dining room. Patris followed me, gently placing her hand on my back as we left. The next day, I filed for divorce. Ivy and I met the following week at a coffee shop near Green Lake in Seattle. She looked just like Wallace, which hit me harder than I expected. Same dark eyes, same narrow smile. But unlike Wallace, her presence had a warmth that wasn't afraid of discomfort. She was kind, measured, cautious but curious. We talked for hours, about her life, her mother, the questions that had followed her all these years. I didn't have all the answers, but I had enough. Enough truth, enough validation. Enough proof that someone from the family she was shut out of was ready to stand beside her. When I told her I was divorcing Wallace, she blinked slowly, then nodded. "Probably for the best," she said gently. It wasn't long before word spread through Wallace's extended family. Meredith, bless her, couldn't hold water even if you poured it into her hands. A few cousins reached out to me privately, expressing shock, discomfort, and in 2 cases, quiet admiration. I didn't need their approval, but it was nice to know that not everyone was blindly loyal to Sybil's fantasy of family perfection. As for Wallace, he tried. For about a week. I got a string of emails, half regretful, half self-pitying. Not once did he ask me what I needed. It was always about what he was losing. Then came the one where he asked me not to make this a big thing publicly. That's when I knew he still didn't get it. He wasn't afraid of losing me. He was afraid of looking bad, so I made it public, not in a vindictive way, but in a real, human way. I told the story in my own words, anonymously at first, on a blog I used to write in college, dusted off and resurrected. The post went viral in a small, quiet way. It resonated with people who had seen the same patterns of silence and control in their own families. People reached out. Women mostly. Women who had sacrificed and swallowed pain for the sake of keeping peace. It turned out I wasn't alone. Sybil hated it, of course. Wallace was humiliated, but neither of them confronted me about it. What could they say? Everything I wrote was true. In the months that followed, I moved into a small rental cottage just outside Gig Harbor. Ivy visited often. Sometimes she'd stay the weekend. We planted a garden together, something I always wanted but never had the space or will for before. One evening, sitting under the string lights in my tiny backyard, Ivy looked over at me and said, "You know, you're the first person in my father's family who ever treated me like a human being." I blinked back tears and took her hand. "You deserve so much more than that." We grew close, not in a forced way, but in a natural, steady rhythm. I wasn't trying to be a mother to her, she had one already. But I was something else, an ally, a witness to her truth, someone she could trust. That was more than enough for me. The final act of closure came in the form of an invitation. Sybil was hosting her annual holiday party. The one with catered hors d'oeuvres, the crystal punch bowl, and a guest list designed to impress more than to connect. I wasn't invited, of course, but Ivy was. She got the invite 2 weeks before Christmas. Hand-addressed, thick cardstock, embossed. She called me laughing. "Should I go?" "Up to you," I said. "But if you do, go as you, not as someone playing nice." She went. And a week later, she sent me a message that simply said, she told everyone I was mistaken, that I wasn't who I claimed to be, so I pulled out the birth certificate and read it aloud over dessert. She turned purple. Then Wallace walked out. That was the moment I knew I'd done something right, not because Sybil was embarrassed. That wasn't my win to claim, but because Ivy had stood her ground. And Wallace, he'd finally seen the truth laid bare in a room full of people who mattered to him, and there was no erasing it this time. No envelope full of hush money. No father to clean up the mess. Now, months later, I live quietly but content. I returned to work as a speech therapist. I joined a hiking group. I bought a dog. His name is Jasper. He's missing a toe and sleeps with one eye open, like he's seen too much, which feels oddly fitting. I don't regret any of it. Not the confrontation, not the divorce, not the silence that came after. Sometimes revenge isn't a scream or a slap or a scene. Sometimes it's true, spoken plainly, at the exact moment it will be heard. And sometimes it's as simple as walking away and letting them hear the door close behind you.